Grace Miller had learned to live quietly in the narrow spaces of her life, the places where no one looked long enough to see how much she was carrying. At 27, she was already tired in a way people twice her age would understand, the kind of exhaustion that settled into her bones after too many double shifts at Mountain Grill, Colorado, and too many nights lying awake in the cramped apartment she shared with her younger sister. The scent of frying oil clung to her uniform, and the dull ache in her wrist never fully faded, yet she kept showing up because rent did not wait, and her sister's textbooks were getting more expensive every semester. That afternoon, the restaurant buzzed with the restless energy of tourists passing through the Rockies and locals grabbing dinner after work. Grace moved between the tables with her usual gentleness, placing plates down carefully and whispering apologies when customers brushed past her too fast. Her pale blonde hair was tied into a loose ponytail she no longer had time to redo, and faint shadows lived beneath her blue eyes. She tried to smile anyway. Near the kitchen door, a customer stood abruptly and bumped into her just as she was carrying a stack of empty plates. The shock made her gasp, and the plates slipped from her hands, crashing against the floor in a sharp clatter that made several heads turn. Grace flinched at the sound. Before she could kneel to gather the pieces, a loud, angry voice cut through the air. "Look at this mess." Every head in the restaurant stilled as Rick Dalton marched toward her. Rick, the manager who treated fear as a management tool, who believed every employee should bend to his mood, and who had made the lives of the waitstaff, especially the women, a constant balancing act between obedience and survival. Grace backed up instinctively, but he closed the space between them faster than she expected. His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist harshly, forcing her to face him. "Look at me when I am talking to you," he barked, his eyes flashing with irritation, as though her mere existence inconvenienced him. Grace's breath hitched as pain shot up her arm where his hand dug too tightly into her skin. "I am sorry, I did not mean to," she whispered, her voice trembling as she tried to steady her breathing. Rick leaned closer, his voice low and threatening. "You never mean it, but you always mess up. Do you enjoy making my job harder?" She shook her head, desperate to remove her wrist from his grip. "Please do not hit me, I really did not mean to." The words slipped out of her before she could swallow them, and for a moment the room seemed to freeze. Several customers exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one stepped forward. Rick's expression darkened with offended pride, as if her fear was an accusation. He lifted his hand sharply as though about to strike her. Grace instinctively jerked away from him, losing her balance on the wet spot left from a spilled drink earlier. Her body tilted, and then she fell, the cold hardwood floor meeting her shoulder and hip, as a sharp cry escaped her lips. The plates she had not picked up rattled slightly from the impact. The restaurant fell into an awful silence. A few employees took a step forward, then stopped, their eyes darting between Rick's scowl and Grace's trembling form. She pushed herself onto her palms, but her arms shook too much to lift her. Tears welled, filling her vision with blur until the room curved at the edges. "I am sorry," she whispered, though no one had asked for an apology. Rick rolled his eyes and muttered something under his breath about useless waitresses. He turned away, leaving her there as though she were nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. The door of the restaurant opened at that exact moment, its small bell chiming above the frame. A man stepped inside, brushing off snowy dust from his worn boots. He wore a brown jacket faded at the seams and carried himself with the easy posture of someone who had spent years blending in, yet the cold mountain air that followed him seemed almost to bow around him. His eyes moved across the room lazily until they landed on the site just a few feet away. Grace on the floor, her wrist red, her breath shaking. For a full second he did not move. He could not. Ethan Hale froze completely, as if someone had pressed pause on the world. Grace. The name did not leave his lips at first. It lived in his chest, where it had been locked away for 7 years, ever since the day he lost her before he became the man the world now knew. He had walked into Mountain Grill in disguise, merely intending to observe his staff without being recognized. He owned the restaurant chain, though no one here knew that the man in the brown coat signing paperwork as Evan Hall was in fact a billionaire. But none of that mattered in the moment he saw her fall. His heart crashed into his ribs, his breath fractured. "Grace," he whispered, finally, the sound almost swallowed by the hum of the heater, but filled with so much stunned emotion that even the air seemed to respond. She did not hear him, not yet, but his world had already tilted back toward her. And nothing would be the same again. Ethan Hale stood only a few steps inside Mountain Grill, Colorado, but his mind was already dragged backward through 7 years of buried memories. The sight of Grace on the floor, trembling with pain, had torn something open inside him, something he had spent years pretending had healed. He forced his legs to move, carrying him farther into the restaurant, his eyes never leaving her for more than a heartbeat. The familiar hum of the dining room blurred into background noise, behind the roar of his own pulse. Grace Miller, the girl who once made every ordinary sunset feel like a promise. The girl he had loved, with the reckless certainty of a 20-year-old who believed time would always wait. The girl he lost before he had a chance to become the man he wanted to be for her. She had changed, and yet she had not. Her hair was still that soft, pale blonde he used to tuck behind her ear when she studied late at night, though now it was pulled into a rushed ponytail with strands falling loose from exhaustion. Her face still held the same gentle kindness, but it was laced with fatigue, the kind that came from shouldering too much with too little support. Seeing her on the ground had nearly made him break his undercover role, instantly tear off the disguise of Evan Hall, the quiet inspector, and reveal himself as the owner of this entire chain. But he held back because revealing too much too soon would overwhelm her, and worse, he needed to understand what she had been living through. That kind of mistreatment did not happen once. It was a pattern, and he needed to see the truth as it was, not as people shaped it for him. He took a slow breath, forcing his heartbeat into something steady as he walked to a booth in the corner, the same booth he had sat in 2 days prior when evaluating the staff. The seat creaked under him as he slid in, his hands clasping together to keep from shaking. His eyes lifted just in time to see Grace push herself upright. She winced when her wrist bent too sharply. Ethan's jaw tightened. Rick Dalton did not realize how close he had come to losing far more than his temper. Ethan watched as Grace brushed the dirt off her knees, her movements small and embarrassed, as though she had apologized to the entire room by simply existing. A familiar tug of ache pulled through Ethan. Grace had always been the kind of person who apologized for things that were not her fault. Even in college, her instinct had been to shrink so others would not be uncomfortable. He remembered countless nights when she would hand him her notes with an apologetic smile, saying, "I know they are messy," even though her handwriting was the neatest he had ever seen. He wanted to walk to her now, take her shaking hands in his, and tell her she never had to apologize again. But this was not their past. This was a present built from years of silence. She did not know who he was anymore. He watched her stand slowly, and heard Rick's voice, sharp and irritated, as he commanded her to clean up the broken plates. She nodded quickly, scooping up the shards even though her hands were trembling too much to hold them safely. Ethan had seen enough. He pulled out the digital tablet he used for undercover audits and opened a file he had already begun, titled Internal Employee Safety Review. He typed notes without breaking his gaze from Grace. Verbal intimidation, physical threat, employee fear, inconsistent leadership ethics violation. Each word tightened his chest. He let himself drift back for a moment to the night he and Grace first met during freshman orientation at Denver University. She had been standing under a tree flipping through a brochure when the wind had swept it from her hands. He caught it before it hit the ground, and she laughed, the soft, warm laugh that would later become the soundtrack of his entire youth. They became inseparable within weeks, sharing long walks across campus and coffee dates in cheap diners. She made him believe in gentleness again after losing his mother shook him apart. She also made him believe he could be something more than the quiet son of a small-town cook. Then everything fractured. Ethan received an unexpected scholarship for a technology program in New York, one that promised opportunities he could not turn down. He asked Grace to come with him, but she could not leave her family. Her mother's health was failing, and her father had already begun disappearing for days, chasing the bottom of a bottle. Grace had chosen duty over dreams, something that Ethan had respected but had not fully understood then. Their calls grew shorter, their messages fewer, until silence replaced everything that once felt certain. He carried guilt for years, believing that if he had fought harder, if he had stayed, if he had not chased success across the country, they might have survived. Now, seeing her struggling under the cruelty of a man like Rick Dalton made regret claw at him with renewed intensity. Rick walked past Ethan's table with a clipboard, muttering angrily about incompetent staff. Ethan's gaze followed him, cold, unwavering. This man had been entrusted with leadership, and instead had created an environment built on fear. When Ethan purchased the Mountain Grill chain the previous year, he had known there were management issues, but he had not expected this level of hostility. That was the entire reason he worked undercover at random locations, so he could see the reality unfiltered by flattering reports. But he had never imagined that in doing so he would find Grace again. As Grace carried the trash bin toward the back hallway, she glanced up, and her eyes brushed past Ethan's for a fraction of a second. He froze, hoping she would look again, truly look. Her gaze lingered barely long enough for recognition but not long enough for memory. She offered a polite, weary half-smile, the kind waitresses gave strangers who did not cause trouble, then disappeared into the kitchen swinging door. Ethan inhaled sharply. She did not recognize him. Of course she would not. He was older now, broader in the shoulders, his jawline sharper from years of stress and responsibility. His hair was shorter, darker, and the world had taught him to hide softness behind calm neutrality. And she had pain in her eyes now, pain he wished he could have taken from her long before it molded her into someone quieter than he remembered. His phone buzzed in his jacket. A message from his operations director flashed across the screen, reminding him to check on staffing reports later tonight. He ignored it. The only report that mattered was standing in the kitchen trying not to cry. He needed to protect her, but he also needed to stay undercover a little longer. If he revealed himself now, everything would shift too quickly. She might retreat. She might think he came here for her instead of for the chain. She might think he was using power to step into her life uninvited. So he swallowed the urge to stand up and fire Rick on the spot. Instead, he watched, listened, waited. And as Grace emerged again carrying a tray of drinks, he whispered under his breath the same promise he had made years ago, when she left his dorm room for the final time. "I will make things right for you someday." When Grace passed by his booth again, he straightened unconsciously, his voice fighting to rise, though he held it back. She did not know that Evan Hall was not real. She did not know that the man watching her was the owner of all 37 Mountain Grill locations. She did not know that he had once loved her enough to believe they could survive the world. But she would. Soon, when the time was right, she would know everything. And this time, he would not lose her. Grace moved through the restaurant the way someone moved through a storm they had grown used to, quietly bracing against each gust, hoping none of them would hit too hard. Mountain Grill Colorado was warm on the surface, full of golden lights and rustic decor, meant to evoke small-town charm, but beneath that inviting veneer lived an unspoken tension every employee could feel, but no one dared to name. And at the center of that tension was Rick Dalton. Rick paced behind the counter with the authority of a man who believed fear was the most efficient form of motivation. His voice carried over the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation, always sharp, always on the verge of anger. Grace worked as quickly and quietly as she could, picking up plates, dropping off drinks, and apologizing to customers for delays that were not her fault. She stayed small. She stayed unnoticed. She stayed safe, or as safe as she could be around Rick. At his corner booth, Ethan watched with growing heaviness. He was careful to keep his head down, his posture relaxed, his presence unthreatening, but inside him every instinct insisted he stand up and intervene. Yet he forced himself not to. Not yet. He needed evidence. He needed truth. He needed to see the full extent of what Grace was being subjected to so he could uproot the problem entirely. A few minutes later, Grace delivered a tray of sodas to a family at table 7. The tray wobbled slightly from the strain in her wrist, but she steadied it with the other hand, a practiced quiet resilience that made something in Ethan's chest tighten. The youngest child accidentally bumped her elbow, sending one soda rocking dangerously. Grace steadied it with a soft gasp and gave the child a reassuring smile. "It is okay, sweetie, no harm done." The mother smiled gratefully and said thank you. Rick saw none of that kindness. Instead, he saw Grace linger 2 seconds longer than he deemed necessary. "Move it," he snapped from across the dining room. "What are you waiting for, an invitation?" Grace flinched and hurried away. Ethan's jaw tightened. Grace had always been gentle with customers, especially children. Seeing that tenderness punished made his hands curl into fists under the table. Over the next 20 minutes, Ethan observed more of the pattern he had already begun to suspect. Rick berated a new hostess for not seating a couple fast enough, even though the servers were overwhelmed. He confiscated a portion of the tip money, claiming it was for breakage fees. He scolded the dishwasher, a shy 19-year-old named Cal, for clocking in 2 minutes late, even though Ethan had seen Cal rush in still tying his apron. Everything revolved around Rick's temper. The staff moved like people walking along the edge of a cliff. One wrong step and they fell. Grace especially seemed to receive the brunt of it. Whenever anything went wrong, Rick looked at her first. When customers complained, even unfairly, he blamed her. When the kitchen got backed up, he barked that she should work faster, as if she controlled the grill line. She kept absorbing blow after blow, offering soft apologies, trying to keep the peace, trying to survive. Ethan felt the weight in his throat grow thicker with each passing minute. Why had she ended up here? What had life done to her after he left? Guilt threaded through his thoughts like barbed wire. He had been building an empire, changing the restaurant industry, appearing in Forbes lists, making headlines while she had been navigating cruelty from a man who did not deserve to stand in the same room as her. The universe had been unkind in its choices. A loud complaint echoed from table 11, drawing Ethan's attention. A middle-aged man waved his hand dramatically, yelling that his burger was overcooked. He jabbed a finger at Grace, who was simply delivering the plate. She tried to explain she would get the kitchen to remake it, but the man interrupted loudly. "Maybe try doing your job right the first time." Grace's cheeks flushed with humiliation, but she kept her voice steady. "I am truly sorry, sir. I will get you a new one right away." Rick appeared instantly, pouncing on the opportunity to assert dominance. "Grace, what did you do now?" Her throat tightened. "I did not do anything, sir. I just brought the kitchen. Rick scoffed. "Blame someone else, why do not you? Do you ever take responsibility for anything?" Grace shook her head quickly. No, I just meant," he cut her off with a raised hand. "Do not talk back. You are on thin ice already." Grace bit her lip and lowered her gaze. Ethan's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He wanted to walk over, take her by the hand, and remove her from that toxic environment completely. But he forced himself to stay still. There would be a right moment for action, and when it came, Rick's entire world would collapse in on itself. As the evening pressed on, the restaurant grew busier. The air thickened with the scent of grilled meat and spilled drink syrup. Grace darted between tables, trying desperately to keep up. Ethan noticed her check her wrist, once rubbing the spot Rick had grabbed earlier. Pain flickered across her face before she masked it again. A wave of protectiveness nearly pushed Ethan out of his seat, but he forced himself to focus. He needed a complete picture of the dysfunction. Only then could he eliminate the root. Rick hovered near the server station, arms crossed, as he watched the staff like a hawk waiting for the next mistake. When Cal accidentally dropped a fork, Rick snapped at him so loudly that two teenagers at a nearby table stared wide-eyed. Cal mumbled an apology, but Rick cut him off again. "Do you want to get paid, or do you want to get fired? Pick one." Ethan scribbled another note on his tablet. Verbal intimidation witnessed again. Pattern confirmed. When Grace came to grab silverware from the station, Rick stepped into her path, forcing her to stop abruptly. "Are you deaf or slow?" he demanded. "This order has been sitting here for 3 minutes. Why are you not on it?" Grace looked at the ticket, confused. "Sir, this is not my table. I think Jenna ran to the restroom, so you handle it. Or do I need to draw you a map?" he snapped. Grace quickly grabbed the plates, even though they were scalding hot from the kitchen window. She winced softly as the heat bit her palms, but forced her expression neutral. Ethan inhaled slowly, trying to keep himself anchored. The cruelty was relentless. She deserved softness. She deserved respect. She deserved the chance to breathe without fear. As Grace walked away with the hot plates, Ethan stood just enough to adjust his line of sight so he could track her movements. In that moment, she paused near the kitchen doorway and leaned slightly against the wall, closing her eyes. Only for a second, but long enough for Ethan to see the exhaustion pull her shoulders down. A single tear escaped, trailing down her cheek before she brushed it away quickly, hoping no one saw. But Ethan did. And the sight nearly broke him. She had cried alone before he could reach her. He whispered her name under his breath, the syllable weighted with every memory he had tried to bury. When Rick reappeared moments later to remind Grace, she still had 2 tables waiting and a side work list to finish before closing. Ethan felt something inside him settle with cold finality. Rick Dalton would not be manager much longer. Not after tonight. Not after what Ethan had witnessed. Not after what he planned to uncover next. As Grace hurried to her tables, Ethan wrote one final note in his audit file. Immediate leadership removal required. The moment he typed it, heat sparked under his ribs. Justice was coming. He would make sure of it. And when the time came, Grace would no longer stand alone. The dinner rush arrived, like a tidal wave that evening, crashing into Mountain Grill, Colorado, with a force that swallowed every inch of calm the staff might have clung to earlier. The cold wind from the mountains carried tourists inside in steady waves, while locals filled the booths with weary hunger after long workdays. Orders piled up, the kitchen sizzled with urgency, and conversations overlapped into a steady roar. Grace Miller had handled busy nights before, but something about this one felt different, heavier, as though the air itself was tightening around her ribs. She moved through the aisles with plates balanced carefully despite the lingering pain in her wrist. She offered soft smiles to customers who barely looked up and apologies to those who seemed impatient. Her chest rose and fell faster than usual, each breath a reminder that she was close to her limit, yet she kept going because stopping was not an option. Ethan watched from the same corner booth where he had settled earlier. His disguise as Evan Hall had never felt thinner, more fragile. Every time someone raised their voice near Grace, he involuntarily leaned forward, ready to intervene. He told himself to wait, to let the truth fully reveal itself before stepping in, but with each passing minute his resolve chipped away. He could feel the tension in the restaurant, the charged atmosphere that signaled something was going to break. And then it happened. A long ticket printed in the kitchen, and Rick Dalton stormed out, holding it up like evidence of a crime. "Whose table is this?" he barked, waving it. No one answered immediately. The servers were busy running food and refilling drinks. Rick's face darkened as he scanned the room, narrowing his gaze on Grace, though she was in the middle of delivering orders, and clearly not the one responsible. "Grace," he snapped, his voice slicing through the air like a blade. She turned at the sound, her expression tight with fatigue. "Yes, sir. Why has this been sitting for 5 minutes? I asked for this table to be prioritized." Grace blinked at the ticket, then at Rick, confusion flickering in her eyes. "Sir, I think that is not my section. Jenna was. She's in the restroom," he snapped, cutting her off. "So do your job." Grace nodded quickly, swallowing whatever explanation she might have offered. She grabbed the tray of plates, though the kitchen staff had not even finished assembling the sides. Rick hovered behind her arms, crossed eyes, burning holes in her back. "Move faster," he muttered. "The restaurant is filling up and you are slowing everyone down." Grace felt the heat from the plates seep into her palms, turning the already painful throb in her wrist sharper. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep her expression neutral. She turned toward the table, weaving between customers, but the tray wobbled dangerously as a nearby chair pushed out abruptly. She steadied it just in time, but one plate slid too close to the edge. She caught it, but the motion made her wrist flare with pain so intense she nearly gasped. Ethan stood halfway without meaning to his body, reacting instinctively to her struggle. He forced himself back down, grabbing the edge of the booth to anchor himself. Not yet, he told himself, but his heart was hammering with a warning he could not ignore. Grace reached the table, set the plates down with a strained smile, and hurried back toward the kitchen, hoping to finish the pending orders before Rick exploded again. She passed Ethan's booth without noticing the worry etched across his face, or the way his fingers gripped his tablet so tightly his knuckles whitened. The noise rose, the lights flickered slightly, the pressure building thicker and heavier. Then a mistake, not hers but one Rick would eagerly blame her for, set everything off. A customer at table 9 complained loudly, holding up a plate with the wrong side dish. Rick, who was already on edge, stormed to the kitchen window, grabbing the ticket and tossing it at the nearest server. "Who messed this up?" he demanded. Before anyone answered, he looked toward Grace, who was walking past, carrying glasses to refill. "Of course," he said. "Of course it was you." Grace stopped blinking. "Sir, I did not even take that order. Do not talk back." Rick's voice cracked like a whip. "Come here." Grace hesitated only a moment before stepping closer, her shoulders curling inward instinctively. Rick leaned in, his breath sharp with irritation. "I am sick of your excuses. You drag this place down every shift." She lowered her gaze, willing her voice to remain steady. "I am trying my best, sir. Trying." He scoffed loudly enough that a few customers turned their heads. "You think trying excuses incompetence? Admit you messed up." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "Sir, I did not, and I cannot sign something that is not true." Rick's jaw clenched as he reached for a disciplinary slip on the counter, scribbling something furiously and thrusting it toward her. "Sign it, now." Grace took a small step back, shaking her head again, more firmly this time. "I cannot, sir. I did not do this." Rick slammed his hand against the counter, making several glasses rattle. The sound startled Grace so violently that she dropped the stack of cups she had been holding. They crashed onto the ground, shattering around her feet. Conversations quieted. Customers paused mid-bite. Grace stared at the mess, eyes wide as tears welled in humiliation. The room became painfully silent. "You see," Rick crowed loudly, pointing at the broken glass. "This is exactly what I am talking about. Completely unreliable." Grace's breath caught in her throat as the tears spilled. "I am sorry. He cut her off again, stepping closer, his presence looming over her. "You run to the back right now and think about whether you want this job. And if you come out without signing that slip, you are done here." Grace nodded quickly, her limbs moving mechanically as she rushed through the swinging door to the kitchen. Ethan stood instantly, his restraint shredded by the sight of her fleeing, with tears streaking her cheeks. He followed quietly, keeping distance so as not to draw attention, but close enough to hear the shaky breaths coming from the walk-in cooler where she had retreated. Grace leaned against the cold metal shelving, sliding slowly down until she sat on the floor, knees pulled to her chest. Her breaths came in short, uneven bursts, the early signs of a panic attack. She tried to swallow it down, pressing her palms to her temples. "I cannot lose this job," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I cannot lose it." Ethan stood outside the cooler, his hand on the door handle, wanting nothing more than to go in and hold her the way he used to when stress overwhelmed her during finals. But this was different. She did not know who he really was. She did not trust him, not yet. He forced himself to stay still, his chest tightening with helplessness. When Grace finally emerged, her face was pale, her eyes red, yet she straightened her apron as though it were armor and walked back out with trembling resolve. She moved toward the server station, but Rick intercepted her, his face twisted in cold satisfaction. "Did you think I would wait all night?" Grace flinched. "Sir, I just needed a moment to no excuses." Rick stepped closer, grabbing the unsigned slip from the counter, holding it up like a threat. "Sign it or pack your things." Grace's lower lip trembled as she shook her head. "I cannot. Because it is a lie." Rick's anger ignited instantly. He raised his hand, not quite striking but close enough for her to recoil instinctively, a whisper breaking from her throat. "Please, please do not raise your hand." Ethan moved before his mind caught up his body, propelled by instinct and memory, and the sharp, metallic taste of fear. But he stopped just at the threshold, watching Rick drop his hand with a mocking scoff. "Pathetic," he muttered, stepping back. "Clean that up now." Grace blinked through tears, stepping toward the mess. Ethan's hands curled at his sides. He had seen enough. Tomorrow would not come for Rick Dalton, not as an employee, not as a manager, not as anything but a memory. And Ethan would make sure of it. The night everything broke was also the night everything began to change. The dining room of Mountain Grill, Colorado, buzzed with noise again, but beneath it pulsed a tense undercurrent, a vibration of unease that most customers could feel without understanding. Employees moved more stiffly, glancing toward the kitchen, as though awaiting the next storm, and Grace Miller stood at the center of it all, holding her composure together by threads so thin they nearly snapped each time she inhaled. Rick Dalton strutted across the floor with the swagger of a man who believed he owned the air. Everyone breathed his irritation, simmering just beneath the surface. He barked orders, glared at the staff, made snide remarks loud enough for customers to overhear, and carried himself like someone waiting for an excuse to explode. When he saw Grace re-emerge from the back after cleaning the broken glasses, he smirked with satisfaction, as though breaking her spirit had been the goal all along. Grace kept her eyes down, retrieving napkins from the supply shelf, trying to steady her trembling hands. Ethan watched her closely from his booth, the edges of his vision turning sharp with controlled fury. He had seen people wield power carelessly before, but this was different. This was targeted, vindictive, personal. And he was done watching. Grace walked toward table 9, carrying refilled drinks, when Rick stepped directly into her path, forcing her to halt abruptly. "Give me your apron," he snapped. She blinked, confused. "Sir, I have tables waiting, and you will not be serving them anymore. Not until you learn how to follow orders." Her breath faltered. "Are you firing me?" Rick leaned closer, lowering his voice but not his cruelty. "Not yet. But I will if you keep pushing me. Now give me your apron." The entire restaurant seemed to pause. A few customers looked up. Jenna, the hostess, froze mid-step, her hand hovering over the podium. Cal hovered by the dish pit, uncertain whether to intervene or disappear. Grace swallowed her humiliation and began to untie her apron, clenching her jaw to keep tears from spilling. Rick snatched it from her hands. "Good. Now, maybe the others will get a clue and realize who runs things around here." That was when Ethan stood. Not abruptly, not theatrically, but with a steady resolve that sent a ripple through the air. Every movement was precise as he stepped away from the booth and crossed the floor toward the confrontation. Rick saw the motion from the corner of his eye, but did not bother looking fully. "Customers do not belong back here," he said dismissively. "Sit down." Ethan stopped a few feet from him, his expression calm but unyielding. "I think we need to talk," he said quietly. Something in his tone cut through the noise. Rick finally turned, giving Ethan a once-over with a sneer. "And who exactly are you? Someone who has seen enough?" Rick scoffed, shaking his head. "Oh, you are one of those customers. The kind that thinks they know something about running a restaurant. Let me guess, you want to complain about cold fries." Ethan's eyes darkened, though his voice remained calm. "I am not here to complain about my food. I am here because I have watched you berate your employees all night." Rick's nostrils flared. "Mind your own business, pal. This is my restaurant to run." Ethan's voice lowered, becoming sharper than any raised volume. No, it is not. But that truth had not landed yet. Rick stepped closer, puffing out his chest, trying to intimidate him the same way he intimidated Grace. Look, back off. This is not your fight. She pointed at Grace. Has screwed up half the night, and people like her do not learn, unless you put pressure where it hurts. Grace's breath hitched. Ethan's face changed. For years he had mastered the art of staying composed under pressure, but this accusation dragged something raw out of him. People like her, he repeated softly. Rick shrugged, unapologetic. Weak, pitiful mistakes waiting to happen, always crying, always messing up. She is lucky she even has a job. Grace lowered her head as though the shame were hers when it never had been. Ethan took one slow step forward. She is not weak, and you will not speak to her that way again. Rick looked him over again, obviously underestimating him. Or what? You going to write a bad review? That line would have been laughable if the stakes had not been so high. Instead, Ethan simply reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. He swiped the screen, then raised it. A video played. Rick's voice echoed through the speakers. Look at this mess. Are you deaf? Do you ever take responsibility? Ethan held the phone steady, his eyes fixed on Rick. I have been recording for the last hour, he said calmly. The entire staff except Rick stilled their movements, hope flickering in their eyes. Rick's confidence wavered only for a moment before he forced a laugh. So what? You cannot use that. You are not authorized to film employees. Ethan's voice dropped in temperature. Actually, I can. Because I oversee employee evaluations. Rick's eyebrows shot up, confusion overtaking arrogance. What the hell does that mean? Ethan stepped closer until only a foot separated them. It means your authority here ends tonight. Rick straightened, trying to regain control. You are bluffing. Who do you think you are? Some kind of hero? Ethan's eyes cut to Grace briefly, then back to Rick. I am someone who knows the difference between leadership and abuse. Rick tried pushing past him toward Grace, who had taken a protective step backward. Sign that written warning now, he barked, raising his hand again. That movement was all it took. Ethan moved in front of Grace instantly, his body positioned between her and Rick in a stance that radiated silent power. If you touch her again, even raise your voice at her, you will lose more than just your job. His words were low, but the threat behind them was unmistakable. The entire restaurant froze. Something shifted in the air around them. Rick looked into Ethan's eyes, finally realizing something was deeply off. This man was not afraid. This man was not bluffing. This man had authority. Real authority. Who are you? Rick whispered. Ethan did not break eye contact. Someone who has seen enough. The silence stretched. Rick's confidence cracked. Customers watched openly now, sensing a reckoning. Jenna's hand flew to her mouth. Cal set down a stack of dishes as though afraid to even breathe. Grace stood behind Ethan, her breath still shaky, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Ethan slowly turned toward her, his expression softening instantly, the moment he met her eyes. Are you all right? He asked quietly. No judgment, no pressure, just concern so genuine it made her swallow hard. She nodded faintly, even though the answer was no. She was not all right. She had not been all right in a long time. Ethan placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, a gesture so gentle that Grace froze from the shock of kindness. Then he looked back at Rick with an expression that could end kingdoms. We are done here, Rick sputtered. You cannot do this. You have no idea who owns this place. Ethan's voice took on a finality that silenced even the nearest customers. I know exactly who owns this place. And tomorrow you will not be part of it. Rick took one shaky step backward for the first time, unsure of his footing, his power dissolving beneath him. Ethan guided Grace away from him toward the hallway that led to the back door, his hand resting lightly on her upper arm. Grace whispered, her confusion barely audible. Why are you helping me? You do not even know me. Ethan turned slightly, just enough that she could see the truth flicker in his eyes, the truth he could not say yet. I know you more than you think. Grace blinked, confused, her breath catching. Ethan looked forward again, guiding her to safety, knowing the confrontation was not over, but the war was already decided. Rick Dalton had no idea who he had just threatened. But he would soon. Very soon. Grace followed Ethan through the narrow hallway behind the dining room, her heartbeat still stumbling in uneven rhythms, her breath catching every few seconds as though her lungs had forgotten how to work properly. The sounds of the restaurant muted behind them, muffled by the heavy metal door leading to the storage area. Here, the air was quieter, cooler, almost still, yet Grace felt a strange buzzing under her skin, as if her body had not yet realized she was no longer in immediate danger. Ethan stopped only once they reached a space near the back exit, where dim yellow lighting cast shadows along the crates of produce and boxes of paper goods. He turned toward her slowly, carefully, as though she were made of glass, and he did not want to risk even the smallest crack. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, the gentleness in his voice so starkly different from Rick's earlier rage that Grace's throat tightened in response. She nodded reflexively, though it was not true. She felt shaken, embarrassed, overwhelmed, but she had learned long ago that showing people how hurt she truly was rarely made anything better. "I am fine," she whispered. "Thank you for stepping in. You did not have to." Ethan studied her, his dark eyes searching her face, as though trying to read the truth she would not speak aloud. "I had to," he said quietly. "No one deserves to be treated that way." Grace lowered her gaze to the concrete floor. Her hands trembled at her sides, the ache in her wrist sharper now that the adrenaline was fading. She curled her fingers slightly to hide the shaking. "He should not have touched you," Ethan added, his voice tightening. "And he definitely should not have frightened you." Grace swallowed. "I am used to it," she murmured, before she realized how terrible those words sounded. She looked up quickly, adding, I am used to dealing with stressful managers and long shifts." Not that." Ethan's expression softened with something like grief. "You should not be used to any of this." She wished she could shrug off the truth of his words, but the heaviness in her chest made it impossible. Silence stretched between them for a moment, filled only by the soft buzzing of the fluorescent light overhead. Grace finally broke it, folding her arms around herself as though bracing for judgment. "You do not work here," she said quietly. "Why did you get involved?" "Most people pretend not to see." Ethan exhaled slowly, looking toward the ground for a moment, before raising his eyes again. "I was sent to evaluate the restaurant," he said carefully, "to assess the staff and management, to observe how things run when no one thinks they are being watched." Grace blinked. Oh. She had heard rumors occasionally about corporate evaluators visiting unannounced, but she never imagined she would meet one on the worst night of her life. "That must be why you were watching everything so closely tonight," she said softly. Ethan nodded once. "And for the past few days," her breath caught. "You have been here before today." "Several times." She felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. "That means you probably saw." She trailed off, unable to finish. Ethan shook his head. "I saw you working harder than anyone on the floor. I saw your patience with customers even when they were rude. I saw how you covered for coworkers when they struggled. And I saw how much pressure Rick put on you." The sincerity in his voice made her chest ache. She lowered her gaze again, a mixture of humility and shame washing through her. "It is just a job," she whispered. "I cannot afford to lose it. My sister is in college and I promised I would help her stay there no matter what." "And you have been carrying that burden alone," Ethan murmured. Grace hesitated, then nodded. "Someone has to," she said softly. "My father left a long time ago. My mother passed 5 years back. It is just us now. I work whatever shifts I can get." Ethan listened intently, soaking in each piece of her story, piecing together the path that had led her to this place. He felt that old familiar ache again, the one he used to feel when she opened up to him back in college. She had always carried more weight than anyone realized, and he had not been there when she needed him most. He let his voice drop to a gentle tone, one that almost trembled. "You deserve better, Grace. More than this job, more than this treatment, more than the fear that has been forced onto you." She forced a small smile, though it wobbled. "Life does not always work out the way we hope." Ethan inhaled deeply, fighting back the urge to say what his heart screamed, that he had hoped for a future with her. That losing her had been the greatest regret of his life. That seeing her again felt like the world giving him a second chance he did not deserve. Instead, he asked quietly, "Have you ever loved someone but lost them because timing was not on your side?" Grace stiffened slightly, her eyes flickering to his with a mix of surprise and something else, something she quickly tried to hide. She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." Her fingers tightened around the hem of her shirt. "And sometimes, it still hurts." Ethan's chest constricted. The truth of her words dug into him like a confession she did not realize she was making directly to the person who needed to hear it most. He took a slow breath, the question forming before he could stop it. "What happened?" Grace looked away, her gaze drifting to the metal shelves stacked with supplies. "He was someone I cared for deeply," she said softly. "We were young and made promises we could not keep. Life pulled us apart, and then, silence. And then, it was too late." Ethan clenched his jaw to steady the wave of emotion rising inside him. He wanted to tell her then and there that it had never been too late for him, that he had looked for her, that he had replayed their last conversations countless times, trying to figure out how everything had fallen apart, but he could not. Not yet. Not while she was vulnerable, not while he was still undercover, not while revealing the truth would complicate her already fragile world. He forced his voice steady. "I am sorry," he said. "Truly." She nodded once, blinking back the shine of unshed tears. "People move on, life moves on," she whispered. "Sometimes all you can do is keep going." Ethan stepped closer, not too close but enough that she felt the warmth of his presence beside her. "You are stronger than you give yourself credit for, Grace. Anyone else would have walked out tonight." She gave a soft, humorless laugh. "Rent is due." Ethan recognized the humor for what it was, a thin shield over a deeper wound. Before he could respond, the kitchen door swung open and Jenna poked her head in wide-eyed. "Grace, Rick is looking for you again." Grace stiffened instantly, the fear returning like a reflex she could not control. Ethan's expression hardened. "She is not going anywhere near him." Jenna blinked, taken aback by the quiet authority in his voice. "Okay, I will say I did not see her." She slipped back inside. Grace exhaled shakily. "He will get worse if he realizes I am hiding." "He cannot fire you," Ethan said firmly. "Not tonight. Not after everything I have seen." She looked at him puzzled. "Why do you care so much?" Before he could answer, they heard Rick's voice carrying through the thin kitchen door, barking orders and demanding that someone find Grace immediately. Ethan stepped slightly closer, positioning himself protectively without even realizing it. "Because," he said softly, "someone needs to care, and because you should never have had to face any of this alone." Grace looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for something she could not yet name. A familiarity she felt but could not explain, a warmth she did not think she deserved. An anchor she had not realized she needed. She breathed out slowly, the faintest tremor in her voice. "Who are you really?" Ethan's heartbeat caught, but he forced a gentle, steady smile. "Someone who is not going to let him hurt you again." And though she did not understand it yet, Grace felt the first flicker of trust slipping into place, the beginning of a truth she had spent 7 years unknowingly circling back toward. Outside, the freezer lights hummed, and the restaurant continued its chaotic rhythm, but here in the quiet, two people stood on the edge of rediscovered gravity, not yet aware of how profoundly their lives were about to collide again. Grace returned to the dining room with hesitant steps, her heartbeat still restless from the intensity of the confrontation and the strange solace she had found in the quiet storage hallway with Evan, the man who seemed to see her with depth no stranger ever had. She tried to ground herself by tightening her apron strings, though her hands remained unsteady. The lights felt brighter now, the noise louder, and every sharp sound made her flinch. But she forced herself forward because work did not pause for broken moments, and survival did not allow space for weakness. Ethan watched her from the corner booth again, though now his entire body was coiled with awareness, his senses sharpened to every detail that could hurt her. He had always been this way where Grace was concerned, even when they were young. Her tears, her worries, her smallest fears had always stirred something fierce inside him. Seeing her now older, quieter, bruised by circumstances he had not been present to shield her from, made something ancient and protective stretch awake inside him. For the next hour he observed how she moved through the restaurant with determination, though her eyes flickered with exhaustion. He also quietly ensured she stayed away from Rick, intercepting tasks she would normally be assigned, instructing another staff member with a calm authority that somehow no one questioned. Grace felt the shift but did not comment. She only felt strangely seen for the first time in years. Despite the chaos, she could not help stealing quick glances at Evan every time she passed near his booth. There was something about him, something familiar in the way he listened when she spoke, and the quiet strength he radiated even when he sat still. But the familiarity unnerved her because she had spent years burying memories she thought would never return. It was almost midnight when the crowd thinned and tensions cooled enough for conversation to settle into the crevices of the restaurant's dimming noise. Grace leaned against the server station, rubbing her wrist gently, the pain sharper than she expected. Ethan saw her wince from his booth, and stood almost unconsciously, his feet moving before his mind formed a plan. He approached her slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Let me see your wrist," he said softly. She hesitated, the instinct to refuse etched into her posture, but something in his voice made her give her hand over. Ethan examined the skin, noticing the faint bruising, the tenderness around the joint. Anger simmered inside him again, a quiet smolder that darkened his gaze. He handled her wrist gently with a familiarity that made Grace's breath catch. He used to touch her that way once long ago when she sprained her wrist during a campus volleyball game. She remembered the same warmth, the same gentleness, the same care. For a moment time bent, and she found herself staring at him too long, forgetting to look away. "Evan," she murmured, "how do you know how to do this?" He paused almost visibly. "My mother was a nurse," he answered smoothly. "She taught me how to treat minor injuries." Grace nodded, but something tugged inside her, the explanation, feeling too neat, too practiced. She studied him more closely, the curve of his jaw, the way he held her hand, the softness in his eyes when he looked at her as though he were seeing someone he had lost. A strange flutter stirred in her chest, one she had not felt in years, one she believed she had buried with the memories of a boy she used to love. She pulled her hand back slowly, grateful yet unsettled. "Thank you," she said softly. "No one has checked on me like that in a long time." Ethan swallowed hard, wanting to say, "I should have been there then," but silencing himself. Grace returned to wiping down tables, but her mind lingered on their brief moment. She felt the pull of something she did not dare name. It terrified her because she had been hurt by life too many times, and hope was a dangerous thing. Near closing time, she overheard Evan on the phone speaking near the back door, his voice low but not low enough to hide its familiar cadence. "Yes, I will send the report tomorrow," he said. "Make sure the regional managers are ready. This location needs immediate restructuring." His tone was steady, authoritative, carrying the weight of someone used to being listened to. Grace froze mid-step. There was something in that voice, something echoing from years ago. A memory flashed: Ethan Hale standing outside her dorm promising to call every night while he was away. Ethan with that warm, deep tone she could always pick out in a crowd. Ethan who held her hand during thunderstorms. Ethan who told her they would make it through anything. Ethan whose letters grew shorter until they stopped altogether. She blinked quickly, banishing the memory, but the whispering resemblance wrapped around her ribs like a hand tightening. When Evan hung up, he turned and found her standing there, eyes wide. For a moment neither moved. His heart thudded painfully because the look she gave him was one he recognized all too well, the look of someone standing on the edge of recognition. "Is everything all right?" he asked carefully. She opened her mouth, closed it, then nodded. "Yes, I just thought for a second." She paused, shaking her head. "Never mind. I must be tired." He wanted to ask what she had almost said, but his fear of saying too much too soon rooted his tongue in place. Before he could speak further, Jenna approached with a worried expression. "Grace, Rick is planning something. I heard him on the phone. He is angry about what happened earlier, and he said he will make sure you are gone before the audit next week." Grace's face drained of color. Ethan's eyes flashed with cold fire. "What exactly did he say?" Jenna swallowed. "I only heard pieces. Something like, she will not embarrass me again, and just watch what happens tomorrow." Ethan's jaw clenched. He looked at Grace, who looked small and fragile despite her attempts at stoic calm. She whispered, "I cannot afford to lose this job. Not right now. Not when my sister's tuition is due." Ethan stepped closer without thinking, wanting to shield her from the world, no matter the cost. He forced his voice steady. "You are not losing your job." Grace stared at him, confused by his certainty. "You cannot promise that. You do not know who controls these decisions." Ethan swallowed the truth resting at the edge of his lips. "Yes," he murmured once, "you would be surprised what I know." She looked at him again, longer this time, as though the shadows of their past were forming shapes she had not recognized yet. "Evan," she said hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" "Anything," he replied too quickly. She lifted her chin, her voice barely audible. "Have we met before?" The question sliced through Ethan's composure. His breath caught, and for a moment his world tilted back 7 years to every laugh, every shared night, every kiss, under dim streetlights. He schooled his features gently. "Maybe," he said softly, unable to lie fully. "This world is small." She studied him again, her brow furrowing as though trying to pull a memory into focus. But before she could speak, Rick's voice thundered from across the dining room for the closing meeting. Grace jumped at the sound, the fragile connection between her and Evan snapping abruptly. She nodded to him with a whispered thank you and walked away, though her gaze lingered one last moment, filled with uncertainty and something strangely hopeful. Ethan watched her go, knowing the past was no longer buried. It was rising, and soon it would return fully, whether either of them was ready or not. The shift the next evening began with a chill that had nothing to do with the Colorado winter pressing against the windows. The atmosphere inside Mountain Grill Colorado felt tense, even before the first customer sat down, as though the walls themselves sensed what was coming. Grace arrived early, hoping to avoid drawing Rick's attention, but the moment she stepped through the door she felt his glare latch onto her like a hook. He stood behind the counter, arms crossed, staring at her with a twisted smirk that made her stomach knot. Morning sunshine filtered through dusty blinds, casting harsh stripes of light across the room, as if exposing every flaw Rick hoped to exploit. Grace swallowed and moved toward the back to clock in. She tightened her ponytail, straightened her apron, and whispered to herself, just get through the shift. Just survive today. But unease coiled beneath her ribs like a living thing. Rick was too calm, too quiet. That was never a good sign. Ethan arrived 10 minutes later wearing the same worn jacket and steady expression, though inside he was anything but steady. He scanned the restaurant immediately, Grace wiping down a booth, Rick pretending to look at paperwork while watching her, the staff exchanging uneasy glances. He felt the shift before a single word was spoken. Something was wrong, and he was not going to let Grace be blindsided. He caught the eye of Jenna, who subtly nodded toward the office in the back. He followed her behind the swinging door. Rick is planning something, Jenna whispered anxiously. He has been in the office all morning, said he was reviewing payroll and tip records. Grace's name was mentioned a lot. Ethan's jaw tightened. He forced his voice calm. Thank you for telling me. Jenna exhaled shakily and returned to the front, leaving Ethan in a corridor filled with the low hum of refrigeration units. He needed to stay under cover a little longer, but the cushion of time was collapsing fast. Rick's retaliation was coming, and Ethan needed to be there when it hit. When he stepped back into the dining room, Grace was carrying plates to table 6. Her smile strained, her movements mechanical. The bruise on her wrist had darkened, a silent reminder of the night before. Ethan's fingers curled unconsciously. He wanted to pull her aside, hold her, tell her everything would be okay, but until he revealed his identity, his authority had limits. For the moment, he could only watch and prepare. The evening crowd rolled in steadily, the restaurant filled with clinking silverware, the low murmur of conversations and the distant sizzle from the kitchen. Grace moved between tables with growing tension in her shoulders, sensing something approaching like a storm she could not see. Rick watched her with a predatory stillness, waiting for his moment. It came sooner than she expected. Around 7 o'clock, Rick emerged from the office holding a small plastic envelope and a printed tip report. His smile was poisonous. Grace, come here. Every muscle in her body froze. She approached slowly, her hands growing cold. Yes, sir. Rick held up the envelope between 2 fingers. Know what this is? She shook her head. He tilted it slightly, letting coins and a few small bills inside jingle. This is tip money from table 9 last night. Missing money. And somehow it ended up in your locker. Grace's eyes widened. What? But I did not. Rick raised a hand. Save your excuses. Jenna found this in your locker this afternoon. Jenna gasped from across the room. No, I did not. I never. He snapped at her. Enough. I do not want lies from either of you. Grace stared at the envelope, trembling. She felt the room sway slightly. Sir, I did not take anything. You know I would never steal. Rick leaned in, his voice dripping false pity. Grace, every thief says that. Grace shook her head rapidly. I swear to you I did not do this. Rick smirked. Then explain why it was in your locker. Her voice cracked. I do not know. Maybe someone. Rick cut her off sharply. So now you are accusing your coworkers. That is rich. Rick held up the printed report. I have the documentation right here. Missing $7.38 from table 9, and an employee found with tip money that did not belong to them. That is grounds for immediate suspension. Grace felt her knees weaken. Ethan stood so abruptly, his chair scraped against the floor. He stepped forward, but stopped himself halfway across the room. If he interfered too soon, he risked exposing his identity before he could legally remove Rick. He forced himself still, even though every fiber in his body screamed to protect her. Rick continued loudly, ensuring all employees could hear. Grace, you are suspended pending further investigation. Turn in your apron and leave the premises. Grace's breath shattered. She felt heat sting her eyes as humiliation washed over her in violent waves. Please, sir, I swear I did not do this. You have to believe me. I need this job. Rick shrugged. Should have thought about that before stealing. Grace's heart thudded violently. Rick's words hit like strikes. She turned desperately to Jenna, who looked horrified. Jenna, tell him I did not do this. Jenna stepped forward quickly. I know she did not. She is honest. And I have never touched her locker. Rick glared. Enough. This is not a debate. My decision is final. Grace looked around the room, searching for an ally, searching for someone to say something, anything that might save her. Her gaze landed on Evan. She met his eyes. He looked as though he was barely containing something, anger, pain, something deeper, but he did not move. He did not speak. Her stomach dropped. A hollow ache expanded inside her. Even he did not believe her. Even he would let her walk out alone. Her throat tightened painfully. Tears blurred her vision. Her hands shook as she untied her apron for the second time in 2 days. Rick snatched it from her. Good. Now get out. She nodded in stunned silence. She could not breathe. She walked to the back, grabbing her coat from the hook, her mind numb and spinning. Her world was collapsing again, and she did not know how to stop it. She pushed through the back door, stepping into the alley behind the restaurant, where the wind cut cold against her damp cheeks. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to quiet her ragged breaths. It was too much, too fast, too cruel. A sob slipped out before she could stop it. She covered her mouth to muffle the sound. Ethan reached the door seconds later, stopping when he saw her crumpled against the brick wall, shoulders shaking. He stayed hidden for a moment, torn between his need to comfort her and the risk of revealing himself too early. He heard her whisper something into her hands. Ethan. She said his name. Not Evan. Ethan. His heart fractured. She remembered him, or at least the pain she carried with his name still attached. He stepped forward instinctively, but stopped himself just before the door creaked. He could not go to her. Not like this. Not until he removed Rick. Not until he could offer her real protection. Instead, he pressed a hand against the cold metal frame, the distance between them a torture he forced himself to endure. Inside the restaurant, Rick printed the termination form with satisfaction. Ethan's eyes turned darker than they had in years. He pulled out his phone, dialing corporate legal with a voice edged in steel. Prepare full termination papers for the manager. Effective immediately. When he stepped back into the alley, Grace had already walked away, her silhouette fading down the dimly lit street, shoulders shaking as she held herself together by threads. He could no longer bear to watch Frey. Ethan whispered into the cold winter air, a vow sharpened by guilt and love and fury. I am ending this tonight, Grace. You will never cry because of him again. Morning sunlight spilled across the parking lot of Mountain Grill, Colorado, turning the frost on windshields into tiny sparks of light. The air carried that sharp winter bite that made people walk faster, breathe deeper, brace themselves for whatever the day might bring. But nothing on earth could prepare Rick Dalton or anyone on staff for what this day would bring. Inside the restaurant, employees huddled together near the host stand, whispering anxiously. Everyone had heard what happened to Grace the night before. Some were furious, some were terrified, some were heartbroken. Jenna kept wiping her eyes, muttering over and over, she did not deserve that. She never deserved that. Cal looked like he wanted to punch something. Even the cooks stayed unusually quiet, their anger simmering beneath the clang of pans. Rick strutted out of his office with a swagger that made several employees look away in disgust. He straightened his tie, brushed lint off his shirt, and checked his reflection in the glass of the pie display. Today is corporate audit day, he announced proudly. Which means everyone better be on your best behavior. He smirked as if the entire building belonged to him. Jenna whispered to Cal, Grace should be here. She should have been part of this. Rick overheard and shrugged. She fired herself when she stole. I simply enforced policy. Cal muttered, something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like liar. Then a sleek black SUV turned slowly into the parking lot. It glided into the space closest to the entrance, with the smooth precision of someone who expected doors to open for him. A murmur spread among the staff. Corporate is here early. Who is that? Must be one of the big guys. Rick puffed his chest and straightened his tie again, preparing his best fake smile. The driver's side door opened. A tall man stepped out, wearing a fitted black suit that looked tailored for someone accustomed to commanding rooms. His posture radiated calm authority. His hair was neatly styled, his expression composed. Even from a distance there was something unmistakably powerful about him, something that made Rick's smile falter. The employees watched silently as the man walked toward the door. When he stepped inside, sunlight framing him like a spotlight, the room went completely still. Because standing in the doorway was not Evan Hall, the quiet man in a brown jacket who had watched everything unfold the past week. It was Ethan Hale, billionaire, owner of 37 Mountain Grill locations across the country, CEO of Hale Hospitality Group, and Grace Miller's long-lost love. The transformation between Evan and Ethan was staggering. Gone were the worn boots and humble jacket. Gone was the soft-spoken disguise. In his place stood a man who carried the weight of his empire in the measured confidence of each step. Rick blinked rapidly, his mouth going dry. Sir, he stammered, you are early. Ethan did not acknowledge him immediately. His gaze swept across the room with sharp precision, absorbing every detail, but his expression did not change. He carried the cool, unreadable calm of someone who had already made up his mind before walking through the door. When his eyes finally landed on Rick, a faint flicker of recognition crossed his face, the kind that warned storms were coming. "Morning," Ethan said, his voice smooth and steady. Jenna nearly dropped her notepad. Cal froze mid-step. Even the kitchen fell silent. Rick attempted a shaky smile. "Mr. Hale, what an honor, sir. If I had known you were visiting, I would have prepared a proper welcome." "I am sure you would have," Ethan replied coldly as he stepped further inside. Rick laughed nervously. "Please allow me to show you around. We run things tightly here. Very professional operation." Ethan raised an eyebrow as though the word professional tasted bitter coming from Rick. Before Rick could gesture toward the kitchen, Ethan spoke again. "Gather the staff, now." Rick hesitated. "Sir, I said now." Something in Ethan's tone made every hair on Rick's arm stand on end. He hurried to round everyone up. Employees gathered in a semicircle, their faces tense with anticipation. Ethan stood in the middle of the dining room, the morning light catching the edge of his suit. He looked like a man about to deliver judgment. When everyone fell silent, he began. "I have been visiting this location for the past week, undercover." Rick paled instantly. Jenna let out a tiny gasp. Cal whispered, "Holy crap." Ethan continued calmly. "I watched your interactions, your leadership, your treatment of both customers and staff. I saw strengths in this team: dedication, hard work, genuine care, and I saw failures, profound failures." Rick swallowed hard, wiping sweat from his brow. "Sir, if there were issues, I assure you I can fix." "No," Ethan cut sharply. "You had your chance." The staff looked between them breathlessly. Rick's voice shook slightly. "What exactly did you think you saw?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I saw a hostile work environment. I saw fear where respect should have been. I saw manipulation, intimidation, and abuse. I saw employees walking on eggshells around a manager who seemed more interested in control than leadership." Murmurs spread through the staff. Rick reddened. "Sir, with all due respect, you have been misinformed. I run a tight ship because these kids need discipline, they need supervision, and Grace Miller needed dignity," Ethan said, his voice slicing through the room so sharply that several people flinched. Rick froze completely. Ethan stepped forward, his expression turning colder. "I watched everything you did to her, everything you said. The threats, the humiliation, the physical aggression." Rick's face drained of color. "Sir, she was unreliable and frankly emotional." "She brought this enough," Ethan said, his voice turning low and dangerous. "She brought nothing but hard work and resilience to this place. What she received in return was cruelty." Rick sputtered, searching for footing. "Mr. Hale, please, I believe this is being blown out of proportion. We should discuss this privately." Ethan turned slightly, addressing the entire room instead. "No, this is exactly where it needs to be addressed. Every employee deserves to know the truth. Every employee deserves to see accountability." The air held its breath. Ethan lifted the termination papers from his briefcase and handed them to Rick. "Effective immediately, your employment with Mountain Grill, Colorado is terminated." Rick's mouth fell open soundlessly. "Sir, you cannot." "I can, and I have. You are trespassing if you remain here longer than 1 minute." The restaurant erupted in relieved whispers. Some employees nearly cried. Rick looked around as though expecting an ally but found none. In a last desperate attempt, he jabbed a finger toward Ethan. "This is personal. You are doing this because of that girl, Grace Miller." Ethan's expression shifted, something hardening beneath the surface. "If you are asking whether I stood up for someone who deserved respect, yes, I did." Rick's face twisted. "She is manipulating you. That girl is pathetic. And that was the final mistake." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes turning to steel. "Say one more word about her. Just one." The threat in his voice was enough to silence the room, to freeze Rick in place, to make every single employee realize they had never truly seen power until this moment. Rick backed away, grabbed his coat, and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was thick. Ethan inhaled slowly, letting the tension settle before turning to the staff. "Please return to your duties. I will be meeting with each of you individually." People dispersed slowly, whispering excitedly, but Ethan remained still, letting the quiet settle into his bones. Then Jenna approached nervously. "Mr. Hale, what about Grace, sir?" Ethan's breath caught. He had been trying not to think about the image of her walking away in tears the night before. "Grace will be reinstated immediately," Ethan said firmly, "with back pay, and she will never face that kind of treatment again." Jenna smiled through tears. She will be so relieved. Ethan's voice softened. Where is she? Jenna exhaled shakily. She lives about 2 blocks down on Maple Street, apartment over the laundromat. Ethan nodded once. Thank you. As he stepped toward the door, his heart pounded with a force that nearly staggered him. He had finally removed the threat. Now came the next step, the harder step, finding Grace, and telling her the truth she deserved to hear 7 years ago. Ethan Hale stood on the cracked sidewalk of Maple Street, with the winter wind cutting across his face, as if urging him to turn back, to rethink, to slow down. But he could not. Not now. Not after what he had seen her endure. Not after 7 years of silence that weighed heavier than any Colorado snowfall. He climbed the narrow staircase beside the laundromat, each step echoing with a memory of the girl he once knew. The girl who used to run up similar stairs at their old off-campus apartment, laughing breathlessly while holding 2 cups of cocoa. But tonight there was no laughter. Only the sound of his own hesitant breath as he reached the second-floor landing and found a small apartment door painted pale blue, its corners chipped, its brass number slightly crooked. Apartment 2C. Grace's home. He lifted his hand, then paused, the weight of everything he had not said pressing down on him. What if she slammed the door in his face? What if she had moved on? What if seeing him only reopened wounds instead of healing them? But he reminded himself of the way she had whispered his name the night before, broken and shaking without realizing he heard it. That single whisper had carried more longing and pain than any love letter could. He knocked softly. There was a pause, a shuffle inside, then the door opened just enough for a sliver of light to reveal her cautious eyes. When she saw who stood there, every emotion she had bottled since the night before cracked visibly across her face. Evan, she breathed. But the name came out uncertain, as though spoken by habit, not truth. Ethan swallowed. Can we talk? She hesitated, her grip tightening on the edge of the door, but then she opened it wider and stepped aside. Her apartment was small but warm, with thrift store furniture arranged carefully, a blanket folded neatly over the couch, and textbooks scattered across the coffee table, likely belonging to her sister. The space smelled faintly of lavender detergent and something baking earlier in the day. It felt lived in, loved in, and exhausted in. Grace stood near the kitchen counter, arms folded protectively around herself. So why are you here? She asked, her voice fragile but steady. You already saved my job, I guess. Or tried to. Why come now? Ethan exhaled slowly, his breath clouding the air even indoors. Because there are things you deserve to know. Things I should have told you then, and things I need to tell you now. She stiffened. Then. The word hit her like a memory she had not invited. Ethan stepped closer, slowly, carefully. I am sorry about last night, Grace. More sorry than I can say. You should never have stood there alone. She shook her head. Last night was not your fault. I have been standing alone for a long time. His expression tightened with something like pain. But you should not have had to. Silence fell between them, heavy and charged, filled with unspoken years. She finally lifted her gaze. Why do you care so much? You barely know me. The words nearly broke him, because once he had known her better than he knew himself. He inhaled the truth and let it out gently. Grace. My name is not Evan Hall. She blinked, confusion settling into her eyes. What do you mean? Ethan's voice softened but carried a tremor. My real name is Ethan Hale. She froze. For a moment she did not breathe, did not blink, did not move. The world around her dropped into a silent, slow orbit. Ethan Hale, the man she had loved in college, the man she had cried for after the distance became too much, the man whose absence had carved a hollow space inside her she had never fully filled, the man she thought she would never see again. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Ethan stepped forward gently. I never meant to lie to you. I came to the restaurant undercover, as part of a company-wide evaluation. I did not know you worked there. I swear I did not. Her knees wobbled slightly, but she steadied herself on the counter, her breath trembling. You watched everything, the last few days, everything. Yes, he whispered, because I needed to understand before I stepped in. And because the moment I saw you again. His voice cracked slightly. I could barely think beyond the fact that you were hurting, and I was too late again. Grace pressed a hand to her chest as if trying to contain the shock rippling through her. You own Mountain Grill, she murmured. Ethan nodded. And you let me believe you were just some quiet guy who liked diner food. I was afraid to overwhelm you, afraid to make things harder, afraid that seeing me again might reopen wounds you did not want touched. Her eyes softened painfully. Ethan, Why did you not say something sooner? Because he said taking another step, I needed to earn the right to speak to you again. She blinked quickly as though his words were too tender to bear. She turned away slightly, her shoulders trembling. I thought I was imagining it, she admitted. Your voice, your eyes, the way you looked at me like you knew me. But I thought it was just my mind playing tricks because I was tired and stressed and desperate for something familiar. Ethan swallowed thickly. You were not imagining anything. I knew you the moment I saw you fall. I recognized you before I even knew how to breathe again. Grace turned slowly to face him, emotions swirling violently in her expression: hurt, longing, confusion, disbelief. You left, she whispered. You went to New York and everything just faded. Ethan stepped closer, pained. I never meant for it to fade. I was overwhelmed. My program consumed everything. Then your mother got sick, and you stopped answering. I wrote, I called, but I had to take care of her, Grace said softly, her eyes shining. I did not have space for hope, for us. I did not want to hold you back. Ethan's expression fell. You never held me back. You grounded me. You were the only thing that made sense. She blinked tears away quickly. But you did not come back. Her voice trembled. And I did not know how to ask you to. Ethan's voice dropped into something raw. I would have come back for you in a heartbeat if I had known you needed me. If I had known anything. 7 years of missed chances hovered between them. Ethan moved closer, gently reaching for her hands but stopping just before touching. Grace, if I could rewrite time I would. I would have stayed. I would have fought harder. I would have chosen you. Her breath cracked. Ethan. He finally touched her hand, a soft, careful touch that felt like remembering how to breathe. I saw you crying last night, he whispered. Saying my name. I heard it. Her eyes widened. You did. Ethan nodded, pain and love tangled in his expression. And it broke me that after all these years, your heart still whispered mine when you were hurting. Grace covered her mouth with her hand, her tears slipping free. I did not mean to say it, she whispered. It just came out. Ethan gently took her other hand. And hearing it made me realize something. Losing you was the biggest mistake of my life. I will not lose you again. Her breath trembled. Ethan, you cannot just come back and fix everything. Life is not that simple. I am not that simple. I do not expect simple, he said quietly. I only want the truth between us. And a chance. Just a real, honest chance. For a moment she looked away, her chest rising and falling, as if she were steadying herself from a fall that had not happened yet. Then she whispered, barely audible, I never stopped loving you. The confession landed like a heartbeat returning after years of silence. Ethan stepped forward and gently pulled her into his arms. Grace collapsed against him with a sob that had been trapped inside her for 7 years. He held her as though she were something fragile and irreplaceable, his face buried in her hair, his heart breaking and healing at the same time. When she finally lifted her head, she whispered, What happens now? Ethan brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. Now, he murmured, we stop losing each other. The world outside faded into winter silence, as two people who had waited too long finally stepped back into the same moment, the past no longer a wait but a bridge. The following weeks unfolded like the slow thaw of winter, careful, steady, and filled with moments Grace Miller never imagined she would live again. It began the morning after their long-awaited conversation, when Ethan showed up at Mountain Grill, Colorado, not as Evan, the quiet observer, but as Ethan Hale, the CEO, whose presence alone seemed to reset the entire atmosphere of the Saming restaurant. Every employee straightened when he entered. Conversations softened. Even the lights seemed to hum differently, as if acknowledging that something fundamental had shifted. But the biggest change was what he did next. He reinstated Grace immediately with full back pay and a formal written apology from the company on behalf of the hostile environment she had endured. Grace had stood at the front counter reading the reinstatement document, with trembling hands, her throat tightening at the words, protections, employee safety, and guaranteed oversight. She had never felt protected at work in her life. And then, Ethan announced something even more shocking. Grace Miller is being promoted to Assistant General Manager as part of our new leadership development initiative. The room erupted in whispers. Grace's jaw dropped. Ethan met her eyes with a soft, steady warmth. You earned this long before I walked back into your life, he said quietly. This is just giving you the opportunities you have always deserved. Grace blinked back tears as applause slowly spread through the staff. Cal cheered loudly, Jenna hugged her, and even the kitchen team poked their heads out to clap. Grace's cheeks warmed with emotion. She had never been celebrated before, not like this, not for something she had earned through resilience and heart, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to feel pride, true pride, the kind that did not depend on surviving but rising. Over the next days, Grace trained under an operations manager sent from corporate to help stabilize the restaurant after Rick's removal. She learned scheduling systems, conflict resolution approaches, inventory control, and safety protocols. At first, she doubted herself every step, wondering if she was capable or if Ethan had overestimated her. But whenever she stumbled, Ethan was there, not with answers but with reassurance. "You do not have to know everything today," he would say softly. "Leadership is not perfection. It is compassion, consistency, and courage. And you have all three." Grace absorbed every word, even the ones she did not feel ready to believe. Her younger sister Lily cheered wildly when she heard the news, racing down their apartment hallway, with her textbooks in hand, crying, "You got promoted! Oh my God, you actually got promoted!" Grace laughed through tears, hugging Lily tightly, letting the joy she had never allowed herself to feel finally spill out. The bruises on her wrist had faded, but the emotional scars Rick left behind still lingered in small echoes, the twitch in her shoulder, whenever someone raised their voice, the way she apologized too quickly when she had done nothing wrong, the fear that one mistake would cost her everything. But each day in her new role chipped away at those old reflexes. Ethan was subtle about it, but his support was constant. He never hovered, yet he always noticed. When she struggled with a spreadsheet, he sent a tutorial. When she doubted her decisions, he shared stories of his early failures, reminding her that mistakes were stepping stones, not indictments. When she successfully mediated a staff conflict, he celebrated it like a major milestone because to her it was. Their relationship did not rush. It unfurled slowly like flowers startled by spring after a long winter. Some evenings after closing, Ethan would sit at the counter while Grace finished paperwork, sipping coffee she made for him, exactly the way he used to like it back in college, one sugar no cream. Those nights pulled them closer, not because of grand gestures, but because of quiet familiarity. Familiarity that had survived 7 years of distance. Once, after a long day, Grace looked up from the schedule she was revising and caught Ethan watching her with a soft, proud smile. "What?" she asked shyly. "Nothing," he answered. "I just never get tired of seeing you step into the world you deserve." Heat warmed her cheeks as she focused on the schedule again, hiding the smile she could not contain. Their second chance at love did not bloom through confessions but through presence. Real presence. Ethan watched her grow into confidence again, and Grace slowly learned to trust that this time she would not be left behind. One night, she visited Ethan's penthouse office at the corporate building in Denver. A place filled with awards, architectural renderings of new restaurants, and photos of his late mother. She traced her finger lightly over one picture, a black and white portrait of a gentle woman smiling warmly at the camera. "You have her eyes," Grace murmured. Ethan's voice softened. "She would have loved you." Grace blinked at the tenderness of that truth. But how would she feel about us? Ethan stepped beside her, his voice low. "She would say, 'You are the best thing that ever happened to me.'" Grace's breath caught. She turned slightly, facing him. "And what do you say?" Ethan looked directly into her eyes. "I say I lost you once because I was young, scared, and stupid, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that I am not going to lose you again." Her heart trembled at the weight of his sincerity. Some nights, she still doubted she deserved love. But every time Ethan looked at her with that unwavering devotion, a new part of her heart healed. Meanwhile, the restaurant thrived under the new culture Ethan and Grace cultivated. Employees felt safe, tips were transparent, schedules were fair. Grace led morning meetings with growing confidence. At first her voice wavered slightly, but by the second week she spoke with a calm authority that surprised everyone, including herself. The staff admired her deeply. She listened. She cared. She protected them the way she once wished someone would protect her. And whenever she stood at the front of the staff huddle, Ethan would watch quietly from the corner, leaning against the counter with a soft smile blooming across his features. It was in those moments he fell in love with her all over again, not for the girl she had been but for the woman she had become. One Friday evening after the restaurant closed, Grace found him waiting outside, leaning against her car with his hands in his pockets. The wind played gently with his hair, and the dim streetlight framed him in a warm halo. She walked up to him, smiling softly. "What are you doing here?" He offered a small, playful shrug. "Waiting for you." "Why?" "Because I wanted to end your week the way I should have ended every week in the past. Together." Grace felt her chest flutter. She leaned against the car beside him, feeling the warmth of his presence envelop her even in the cold night air. "How are you so sure of us now?" she whispered. "After everything." Ethan turned to her, his gaze steady, unshakable. "Because I finally understand something I did not at 21. Love is not about timing. It is about choosing someone every day, no matter how messy life becomes. And Grace, I choose you. Every day." Her eyes filled instantly. She pressed her forehead lightly against his chest, breathing in the quiet promise he offered. Ethan rested his chin atop her head, his arms circling her gently. In the soft glow of the streetlight beneath the Colorado sky, they stood there, not as CEO and employee, not as billionaire and waitress, not as broken halves, but as two people rebuilding a future brick by brick with tenderness, patience, and a keystone love that had never truly disappeared. 1 year later, the Colorado sun dipped low across the horizon, casting a warm amber glow over the newly renovated Mountain Grill, Colorado, now the top-performing location in the entire state, a transformation no one could have predicted 12 months ago. Inside the dining room, laughter echoed between reclaimed wood walls and soft pendant lights, and families gathered with a sense of comfort that had not existed during the days of fear under Rick Dalton. The restaurant felt alive, safe, and undeniably full of heart, and so much of that change came from the woman now standing confidently near the front counter, reviewing the night's roster. Grace Miller had changed more in 1 year than in the 7 before it combined. Her posture straighter, her eyes brighter, her presence steady with a calm authority she had grown into with every passing day. She now wore the title, General Manager, embroidered neatly on her name badge, a title she had earned not through favoritism, but through relentless dedication, through compassion, through resilience, and through proving again and again that leadership meant lifting others, not stepping on them. Under her guidance, employee turnover dropped by 70%, customer satisfaction climbed to a record high, and staff culture blossomed into something warm and supportive. Tips increased, team morale surged, and new training programs focused on emotional well-being, and career growth became the standard. Even corporate noticed, requesting that her management style be documented as a model for other locations. But the true transformation was not just in numbers or accolades, it was in the way Grace herself glowed softly with confidence and peace, something she once believed she would never feel again. That evening, as she finished speaking to a server about their weekend shifts, she felt familiar hands circled gently around her waist from behind. She smiled immediately before even turning around her heart, recognizing the presence long before her eyes did. "You are working late again," Ethan murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. Grace leaned back into him with a soft sigh. "You say that like you did not just finish reviewing 3 expansion proposals." Ethan chuckled, his warm breath brushing her cheek. "Touché." They turned toward each other, sharing a quiet smile that held years of loss and a year of healing all woven into one gentle moment. Ethan looked around the dining room, admiration softening his features. "This place feels different," he said proudly. "Different in the best way." Grace crossed her arms playfully. "Maybe it is because the staff is not terrified of their manager anymore. Or maybe she is just really, really good at her job," he replied, winking at her. She nudged him, but her cheeks warmed. There was a time compliments made her shrink, uncertain whether they were true or pity. Now, she accepted them with grace because she finally believed them. Outside, the evening rush built steadily, with people lining up by the entrance, families, couples, travelers, all drawn to the warmth and kindness the restaurant had become known for. And though employees bustled around, greeting guests and preparing tables, their joy was unmistakable, a reflection of the leadership that nurtured them. Grace watched them with a soft, proud smile. "I love this team," she murmured. Ethan followed her gaze. "They love you back. You changed their lives, Grace." She shook her head gently. "We changed this place together." Ethan arched a brow. "I made financial decisions. You made emotional ones. You gave them dignity, purpose, safety. People do not stay because of a paycheck. They stay because they feel seen." Grace's eyes shimmered slightly. She never thought she would hear someone say that about her. Before she could respond, an excited squeal carried across the room. Lily burst through the door, wearing her college hoodie, backpack bouncing behind her. "Grace," she shouted, "I got the internship." Grace gasped and rushed toward her, wrapping her sister in a tight hug, laughing with pure, overflowing joy. "Oh my God, Lily, I am so proud of you." Ethan grinned widely, stepping beside them. "Congratulations," Lily beamed. "I could not have done it without your help, guys." Grace cupped her sister's cheeks. "You earned this. Every bit of it." Lily hugged her again, then whispered playfully, "Also, Ethan is staring at you like you just hung the moon." Grace flushed and swatted lightly at her sister, but the teasing made her heart flutter in that familiar warm way she still had not fully grown used to. As dinner service slowed, Ethan approached Grace with a gentle smile. "Ready for your surprise?" She frowned playfully, crossing her arms. "What surprise?" "If I told you, it would not be a surprise," he said, grabbing his coat and offering her his hand. She took it immediately, trusting him without hesitation. He led her through the back hallway, past the storage room where they had shared some of their hardest conversations, then up a short metal staircase that led to the new rooftop terrace added during the restaurant's renovation. The moment she stepped outside, Grace gasped. Strings of soft golden lights hung overhead, swaying gently in the cool evening breeze. The mountains stretched across the horizon, painted in purple, and rose under the sunset. The tables had been cleared, leaving the entire rooftop empty except for one small arrangement near the edge, where 2 cups of cocoa waited steaming. Grace turned slowly, her eyes filling. "Ethan, this is beautiful." Ethan stepped in front of her, taking both of her hands, his face lit by the soft glow of lights and fading sun. "I wanted you to see this first," he said quietly, "before anyone else, before the staff, before the customers, because this rooftop, this moment, this view is what I always imagined your future would look like, open, beautiful, full of light." Grace felt tears spill before she could stop them. Ethan brushed his thumbs beneath her eyes, smiling softly. "A year ago I found you on the cold ground, terrified, whispering for someone to please not hurt you," he said, voice trembling. "Now look at you, strong, respected, leading an entire team, and more beautiful than ever." Grace laughed through tears, hitting his chest playfully. "You always say things that make me cry, only because you never heard the things I never said." She swallowed. "What things?" Ethan reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Grace froze her breath, catching in her throat. Ethan opened it slowly, revealing a delicate ring with a thin band, and a brilliant diamond that shimmered like the reflection of sunlight on snow. Grace brought a shaking hand to her mouth, her vision blurring instantly. Ethan's voice softened into something reverent. "7 years ago, I lost you because I was too young to understand what love required. But this past year you have shown me strength I never knew existed. Grace Miller, you are the bravest, most compassionate woman I have ever known. I do not ever want to face another year without you." He lowered himself to one knee, the lights above flickering gently in the breeze. "Grace Miller, will you marry me?" Grace's breath trembled, the world narrowing to the man kneeling before her, and the truth beating fiercest in her chest. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes, Ethan, yes." Ethan slipped the ring onto her trembling finger and stood pulling her into his arms as she cried into his chest, laughing through the tears. They kissed under the soft lights and endless Colorado sky, a kiss filled with second chances, new beginnings, and a promise sealed not with perfection but with resilience. As they held each other atop the restaurant that had once been a place of fear, now transformed into a place of healing and hope, Grace realized something quietly profound. Sometimes the greatest love stories are not the ones that start perfectly, but the ones rebuilt from broken pieces, placed gently back together by 2 people who refuse to let go again. If you are still here with us at the end of Grace and Ethan's journey, then maybe you felt something stirring inside you too, because stories like this are not just about romance or second chances, they are about the quiet truth we all carry. Deep down, the truth that kindness can change a life, that courage can rebuild a future, and that sometimes the person we lost or the version of ourselves we thought was gone forever can return in a way we never expected. Grace began her story on the cold floor of a restaurant, trembling under the weight of fear and humiliation. Yet tonight, she stands under the Colorado sky with a ring on her finger, a team that loves her, and a man who finally understood the depth of his own heart. And maybe you have lived through your own dark chapters, the moments where life knocked you to your knees when you whispered, "Please do not hurt me," not always with words but with your exhausted heart, hoping the world would listen. Maybe you know what it is like to work hard and still feel invisible, or to carry the responsibility of a family on your shoulders while pretending you are not breaking inside. Or maybe you know the haunting ache of a love lost too soon, the kind you never fully forget no matter how much time passes. If any part of Grace's story touched a familiar place within you, then before you go, I want to ask you this: what part of her journey did you connect with the most? Was it the moment she found her voice after years of shrinking herself, or the moment Ethan stood between her and the person who tried to destroy her spirit, or the moment she realized she deserved a future filled with dignity, safety, and love? Tell us in the comments, because your story matters too. And think about this for a moment. If someone had stood up for you during the hardest moments of your life, how different might things have been? If one person had said, "I see you, I believe you, I will not let you face this alone," would it have changed everything? We read every comment here, and you will never know how many people find strength in the words you share. Someone scrolling through the comments right now might be working a double shift on aching feet, might be caring for siblings or parents, might be nursing a broken heart, or trying to escape a toxic boss who makes them feel small. Your voice might be the warmth they need tonight. And while you are here, tell us where in the world you are watching from. Colorado, Texas, Florida, New York, Canada, Australia, the UK. It amazes us every day how this little storytelling community spans the entire globe, each of us rooting for love and justice in our own corner of the world. If you enjoyed this story, please take a second to like the video, because that one tiny tap truly helps more people discover these stories. And if you love emotional billionaire romances, second chances, stories of ordinary people finding extraordinary courage, then hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because we have so many more journeys to share with you. Stories of healing, of resilience, of love that arrives right when life feels the heaviest. Before you leave, I want to leave you with one last question, the kind that stays with you quietly long after the story ends. Who would you become if you finally believed you deserved better? Think about it, sit with it, and let Grace's journey remind you that no matter how painful your past has been, your next chapter could still be the one that changes everything. Thank you for being here, for supporting this channel, and for believing in the power of stories that heal. We will see you in the next one.